Welcome to Science at FMNH, a podcast and video series that explores the behind-the-scenes science, collections, and research at Chicago's Field Museum. We continue our discussion with Rüdiger Bieler to learn more about his research and his in-depth surveys of marine mollusks, such as snails and oysters, in the Florida Keys.
Yeah, I'm Rüdiger Bieler. I'm curator of invertebrates at the museum. I'm interested in the biodiversity of South Florida, and particularly the Florida Keys. That area and the surrounding water that interests me has the size of the country of Belgium, so it's a sizable area. Probably the most dramatic impact was the construction of initially the railroad bridges in the 19-teens, and then later they were replaced by car bridges, automobile bridges. It is so remarkable because, first of all, they are very, very large. I mean, the 7-mile bridge is literally a 7-mile concrete structure. So putting in these enormous amounts of concrete have changed the environment considerably. During construction, there was a lot of siltation in the water, and it takes a while for everything to calm down again, but also permanently, because suddenly the organisms that like to sit on hard things, on dock walls and bridges, found a substrate that they never had before. Well, mollusks are incredibly diverse, both in the kind of habitat they live in, but also in size. So we have to use a whole variety of different techniques. A lot of it for the smaller shelled organisms is literally collecting sand, or what looks like sand, and then sorting it out under a microscope. We at this point have a pretty good understanding of which animals were there 100 years ago, 80 years ago, 50 years ago. So we've seen some animals come in since, we've seen some disappear, and we've seen big changes in their relative abundance. And as I mentioned before, the animals that like to sit on hard substratum, oysters in particular, have expanded tremendously. So from the oyster perspective, kind of putting in these bridges was absolutely wonderful. One of the things that we are trying in parallel is to build up the infrastructure at a more general level. One might think that there are vetted listings of the mollusk species in the Western Atlantic, or all the literature would have been compiled on species that have been described in that region. And that's just not the case. We are far behind our colleagues in the vertebrate units, and far behind, let's say, what we know about flowering plants or trees in general. If we know so little about the biodiversity of probably the best studied, best collected part of the U.S. coast, everybody has collected something in Florida, then how little do we really know about the Caribbean and other areas? How much do we really know about Cuba or Yucatan or the northern coast of Venezuela? If we can triple the number of known species within 10 years for Florida, I think we have a lot of unanswered questions about existing biodiversity in the Caribbean. But in many ways, we're still, we've taken the first few steps. This is really basic science, very early into the project, and I think it will lay the foundation to questions to come.